In this lesson, we'll set up controls for the legs and claws. Before getting started, I'd like to point out that I made sure to turn off the renderability of the back and thorax controls, so let's make sure we do that. Next, let's go ahead and grab the front thigh bone. So we're going to grab that left leg's thigh bone. We're going to go ahead and head over to Animation, IK Solvers, and apply a History Independent or High IK Solver. What's great about this solver is that it has a swivel angle that we can use to control, let's say, the knee, or for our arms case, the elbow. Then we could also use a target object, if we'd like, that the IK system points at, so that as we start to move that object, now we have another way to control the knee or elbow. Now in our case, looking at the legs, we might be better off working with a target object, but for the arms, it would be difficult to fit an object inside of this small space, so we might go ahead and just work with a custom parameter. But we'll worry about that when it's time. Alright, so we have our IK goal in place. Let's go ahead and take care of the other legs. So again, we just go ahead and create an IK system from the femur all the way down to the nub. Let's go ahead and find our History Independent solver, go ahead and connect it, and we'll do the same thing for the right side. We'll go in and grab our History Independent solver, connect. We'll do that once more. There we go. Alright, now let's go ahead and select them all and have them stored in our IKs layer. So with them all selected, we'll head over to Tools, Manage Layers, and add them. It's also a good idea to freeze their transforms. Let's go ahead and Alt-right click and do that. Alrighty, great. That way, as we start to test these out, before we add the actual controls, we have a very fast way of bringing them back by using transform to 0. Let's now go ahead and rename them. So the first one we created will be High IK, or History Independent IK, underscore L underscore petiole leg 01. Alright, I think that this is a very clear naming convention. I'll go ahead and copy that name and use that to rename the others. So, instead of petiole, that's going to be gaster for the rear limb. And then when we get to the right side, it'll be the exact same steps here, except instead of an L, we're using an R. So that's going to be High IK R petiole leg. And then for the one at the back, let's go ahead and paste that in. That's going to be R gaster 01. All right, sweet. So we have all of our IK systems in place. It's now time to go ahead and create our control objects. And again, we can go ahead and work with spheres to drive the legs. So let's go ahead and head over to Create. We'll make a sphere. Just make it kind of small. There we go. We'll now go ahead and right click. We'll head over to Object Properties and we'll turn off the renderability of this object. We'll also go to Tools, Manage Layers, and add this to our Controls layer. Alright, great. So we don't have to take care of that for the other controls. We'll clone from this. Let's go ahead and press Shift A and quick align this over to the first IK goal. We'll now go ahead and right click and we'll choose Convert to Editable Poly. Since that's what we've been working with, we'll go ahead and stay consistent with that. Since it's an editable poly now, we can go to its vertex of object level, grab our points, go ahead and move this out in a way in the X and Z plane. Let's also go back to Tools, Manage Layers, and bring back our model just to make sure we've moved this control far enough so it's easy to select. Alright, great. That looks good. So from here, you can basically go ahead and rename this object. That's going to be enum underscore L petiole underscore leg 01. We're essentially using the same naming convention as the goal object, only instead of High IK, we use anim instead. Now since this is on the left side of our model, Let's go ahead and work with a shade of blue. You can use any color you'd like, but let's make sure that the color on the left and right sides are different. And let's also make sure that we don't use the same color as we have used for the center of the body. Again, this is just to add clarity to our rig. So I've used a light blue here. Now if we select the object and you see that the pivot point is at the center of our selection instead of where it should be, make sure you just check your pivot mode. So if I were to go ahead and switch this to the first choice, so we can pivot from the pivot point center, now that's the correct pivot. Alright, sweet. Okay, so from here, let's say we go ahead and clone this object, hold down Shift, and we'll go ahead and drag out to create a copy. This is going to be NML Gaster, leg 01. We'll press Shift A to quick align it over to our IK goal. And now for the right side, we can essentially just go ahead and mirror this object. Let's go ahead and grab our mirror tool at the top. We'll make this a copy. We'll now go ahead and press Shift A and quick align this over to the IK goal of the front leg on the right side. We'll have this renamed. So that's going to be NMR Petiole. So let's make sure we go ahead and rename this object to the correct name. You'll see that since it has been cloned, it is already a part of our controls layer, so that's good. Let's go ahead and hold down Shift and we'll create another copy. That's going to be NMR Gaster leg 01, and we'll now go ahead and Shift A, quick align this to the last IK goal. From here, let's go ahead and grab these two controls on the right side and switch their color up, let's say to a shade of green. Alright, I think that this is going to work out very well. Now we want to take these controls and we'll now want to link them over to our global control. So let's go ahead and grab our linking tool and we'll link to that main node. Great. From there we can go ahead and alt-right click and freeze their transforms. Alright, sweet. So we now have a way then of resizing our rig, so that's good. And these controls will follow. Now what do we do about the IK goals? Well, simple. All we need to do is go ahead and link them to their control objects. So we link, and then with them still selected, we just go in and freeze their transforms. Alright, let's go ahead and take care of the others. So after we link, we go ahead and freeze their transforms again, so we'll always remember this spot. Let's go ahead and take care of the next. Of course, when we're using constraints, if we're constraining an object, we don't want to freeze transforms on the constrained object because that will clear out the constraint. Oh, let me go ahead and make sure that this is linked first. Then we'll go ahead and freeze the transforms down. Alright, sweet. So watch this. Now when we go in and we try to resize the rig, everything gets resized. Alright, sweet. Now let's go ahead and work with target objects for the knees essentially. We'll head over to create. We'll create a box. Just make that really small as we've done before. And if you like, you could also work with the cube option. So I'll just go ahead and create this. If you do want this to be just one uniform size, you can always head over to your modify panel and use just one of these values. Let's say about 0.3. So we'll go ahead and have them all set to 0.3, and now they're all just the same. All right, so you have that option as well. But either way, let's go ahead and hide our model because we need to make sure that we connect this in a way where it will not cause the leg to shift. And you can see that the legs are at a bit of an angle. So here's a trick to make this happen. All we need to do is go ahead and first freeze the transforms of this object. And then we can go ahead and press Alt-A to align this over to, let's say, the tarsus bone and position and orientation. From there, let's go ahead and switch our move tool over to, let's say, local mode. Now here's what we're doing here. We're moving along the same plane as the tarsus bone. So as we start to move this object up, now when we go ahead and essentially use it as a target object, there will be no shifting because it's on the same plane as the rest of the chain. And we made sure to freeze our transforms because all we need to do now is go ahead and Alt-right click and use rotate to 0 to essentially zero out the orientation so it's not at an angle. It's not a big deal, but if you want to straighten it up, you can do so that way. Alright, so that's essentially what we do here. Now what I'd like to do is go ahead and first head over to the hierarchy panel, go to pivot mode here. We'll choose effect pivot only and we'll go ahead and choose center to object. So the pivot is right there at the center of this object. We'll also now go ahead and right click and choose convert to, make this an editable poly so we can move its shape if we'd like. We can make sure that it's going to be a part of our controls layer. And now, let's say we go ahead and, again, just freeze its transforms. We'll go ahead and use Alt-A to align to that same tarsus bone using the same options. We'll go ahead and move this object up in the x-axis. Let's bring our model back just to make sure we move it up high enough. Great. And then from there, let's say we go ahead and now hide our model just so we can focus on the skeleton. We'll now go ahead and Alt-right click and use rotate to 0 to bring this back. So watch. If we go ahead and take the IK goal object, head over to our motion panel and choose pick target and grab our box here, you'll notice that the box has been assigned and no shifting has occurred. Sweet. Let's say we go ahead and recolor this object, that same color of blue we've been using. We'll also have it renamed. That's going to be anim underscore L. And then following that, we can essentially just go ahead and use target in this name. So that's going to be petiole leg and then TRGT01. Alright, sweet. So there's our name for this object. Great. So at this point, what I'd like to do is go ahead and clone it. Let's go ahead and hold down Shift and we'll go ahead and drag out a copy. There we go. From there, we'll have this rename. That's going to be Lgaster leg target 01. And I'm going to repeat the process again, but for the right side, I'll go ahead and pause the video and take care of that because the steps are the same. So remember, we'll just go in, we'll use Alt-A to align to that leg bone to make sure it matches the orientation of the rest of the chain, so it's essentially on the same plane. Before we do that, remember we want to go ahead and freeze our transforms if we would like to go ahead and zero out the rotation so it's pointed as the other controls are. So you have that option. So remember, you'd essentially just go ahead and freeze your transforms. Alright, and then when you go ahead and Alt-A align, you can bring back your model. You could start to lift up the cube object. Now you can go ahead and right click and use rotate to 0 to correct the orientation. Now at this point, we can go ahead and hide our model. We can go ahead and grab the IK goal here, and we can choose pick target and grab our cube. So now when we go ahead and take the cube and we start to move it, we're now controlling that knee. Now, here's an option you have of making sure that you mirror these over correctly, so you don't necessarily have to go ahead and use Alt-A. Instead, all you need to do is go ahead and just freeze your transforms and make sure that this is ready to be connected in. Remember, we can go ahead and work with, let's say, a helper object to figure out the mirror axis, or we could essentially use the same object here and just make sure that our coordinates are set to world when we're under the move tool. So just to kind of show you this, if we were to go ahead and take these two objects now and press Control V, we can now go ahead and make them copies, choose OK. We can now go ahead and move them over And watch this, when we grab the first object we made for the knee, we could essentially look at its x-axis. Alright, let's go ahead and copy that value. We can now go to the next object and paste in the reciprocal. So that's about negative 2.41 in my case. Alright, sweet. So now that's on the same plane. And now when we go ahead and connect this in, if we were to go ahead and grab the IK goal here and choose none, and grab our object, notice the leg does not move. Alright, so let's make sure we take care of that for the other control. We'll also make sure that we go in and rename these objects and recolor them as well, and we'll freeze their transforms. So I'll go ahead and pause the video and take care of those steps. Alrighty, so here are the knee controls for the right side of our character. Now let's go ahead and talk about where these should be linked. So we could always have them linked to, let's say, the leg control, but that does not allow us to kind of move the knee independently. So what that means is if we wanted to, let's say, have the knee locked, we couldn't do that if we linked to our control object, because as that control moves, of course, the knee control would move as well. So for that reason, let's go ahead and make sure that they're all linked over to our global node. So we have all of the control we need. Great, so once we've managed to do that, we could just go back in and freeze their transforms. With them still selected, let's go ahead and right-click and choose Object Properties and turn off Renderable. Alright, sweet. So we have our knee controls in place. They're looking good. So the last step is to go ahead and create a claw control system. And we could use a custom parameter for that. Really simple to set up here. We'd simply go ahead and just grab, let's say, our leg control. It makes sense to find our claw control here instead of adding an extra control, which tends to start cluttering up our rig. So instead, we'll just go ahead and select our leg control. We could head over to our Modify panel, and we'll add an attribute holder. That way we can have animators work with just a clean attribute holder here instead of having to worry about all of these parameters. If we added our custom parameter to this list, it would be at the bottom and it'd be kind of annoying to find. So we'll just go ahead and use an attribute holder. We'll right click and choose rename and rename this extra controls. Now we can go ahead and press Alt 1 to grab our parameter editor. You could also find this underneath your animation menu, and here it is. So at this point, we can go ahead and essentially just go ahead and name this, let's say, claw, because that's descriptive enough. And then we can go ahead and give this a min and max of, let's say, negative 360 to positive 360. We may not take it that far at all, but we have room in case we ever need to. We're now going to click on Add. And now to connect, it's just a matter of figuring out the axis we need to control on this bone object. So from here, if we were to go ahead and grab our rotate gizmo and have it set to gimbal, clearly it's the z-axis. So that's what we want to tie in. If we grab our control now, we can right click and choose wire parameters. That's going to be modified object. From there, that's going to be custom attributes claw, and we'll tie that to our claw bone here. That will be transform rotation 0 Euler, since we have frozen the transform. It's very important, so we start out with that value of 0 here. And then that's going to be the rotate Z. We can now go ahead and connect. When we start to move this parameter, you might notice that the movement is a bit harsh. So if you like to get finer control, you simply go ahead and use the function deg to rad. So that's capital D for deg, capital T for 2, and capital R for rad. And then we'll go ahead and wrap claw in parentheses so that this function gets applied. We're essentially converting degrees to radians. We'll now go ahead and update this, and now when we go ahead and close this out, notice we have better performance out of that claw system. Alrighty, so that's going to finish up this lesson. Let's go ahead and take care of the other claws. And guess what? The legs are done at that point, so we can go ahead and move to the arms in the next lesson.